All right, well, good morning and welcome to your last day of senior seminar. And I guess the news is out. So when I say your last day of senior seminar, I mean that in a profound way. You guys have been exempted then from the senior thesis, and probably a good decision to go ahead and let that lapse this year due to the circumstances. And we don't ever really know what's going on in individual families and households, and um, probably a lot more than we know about. So probably a good idea. So I'm going to talk today, just the last little lecture here. Probably won't take the entire time up like I have and some the last couple of times. But I want to talk about Jean-Paul Sartre, who is a French philosopher, 20th century philosopher. Lived, I think, until 1980. And so the first person we've talked about who's, I think we've talked about that was alive when I've been alive. So I think I was starting high school in 1980. So yeah, I was a freshman maybe then. But Jean-Paul Sartre lives in France, and he really did a variety of things, all philosophical in nature. He was a playwright. He was an essayist. He wrote numerous books. He was a college professor and lecturer. I know you've already read some things about him. I don't know how much of his background. I won't go into that too much, but this whole existentialism, this philosophy, really comes out of Europe in the post World War II era. So we've been very fortunate, at least in the last 160 years or so. We haven't had a war where we've experienced the kind of devastation, and even the Civil War didn't inflict the kind of devastation upon a country that, let's say, that the Germans did upon Poland, or that the United States did upon um, the Germans. And of course, France had gone through a dark period then too, being occupied by the Nazis. Just the whole general atmosphere of Europe was not a well. There were a lot of things to be hopeful for, and there was rebuilding going on, and there was it took some time before there was any kind of economic upturn after the war. But of course, that all came and healed itself over time with a lot of help. Um, but um, the people, though, would have really kind of been at their deepest point, and emotionally, really at their lowest point, probably in their lives. Um, People literally lost everything, lost their home, lost their financial stability, whatever they had, lost husbands, lost sons, lost children, men and women, civilians certainly were killed. Anyway, you know this already from history. I won't go over it too much, but things were pretty bleak in the years, let's say, leading on up until the mid 1950s or so, really. So for about 10 years or so after World War II, for much of Europe, um, um, and not all countries were as destroyed as some countries were. France really, on all honesty, had not been bombed the way that, really in any way that I know of, in the way that um, other countries in Europe had been over time. Okay, so out of this then comes not only Jean-Paul Sartre, there's others that are, you know, not proteges, but were thinking the same way, intellectual people. But let's just start in with Sartre. Sartre spent a lot of time, I think I mentioned this at the beginning of class, in the very beginning of the quarter, which seems like an eternity ago now, but Sartre spent a lot of time in the cafes of France as they were reopening. He was part of this kind of intellectual circle, and then we hear about people talking about this kind of bohemian life that went on in Europe after World War II. Some of that was kind of almost forced upon people, but the artists then and the thinkers and writers, they were a part of this as well, and they gathered on the left bank of the Seine River, which runs through Paris, runs past Notre Dame Cathedral, and through kind of all the popular areas of town. And Sartre sits there and he observes people. He just watches people. A lot of people like to, are people watchers. But he's observing them not just, to see who's interesting or who's cute or whatever. He's watching them for his own philosophical reasons. And he notices that as he sees people walk by and hears little snippets of their conversation as they go by and watches them in the cafe and how that they react to different things going on, he notices that there's this kind of constant action, reaction, flow to things that go on. It seems like maybe a rather obvious kind of statement, but to put it the way he put it, we're constantly reacting, and to back up when something happens, before we react, we're making a decision on how to react. So something happens. Let's say you're sitting in a cafe and the waitress drops, Pepsi on your lap. All right, you make a decision how you're going to react. Now, maybe some of your reactions a bit instinctual. It's cold, or something, a hot beverage or whatever. You might react a certain way because it's out of pain or out of shock. But then how you really the action that you have control over, the reaction you have control over, that's all up to you. So you completely control, as a human being, you control the way in which you react to things. When I say you control it, I'll just jump right in here, that Sartre is really talking about freedom. You have the freedom to choose how to react to it. You may choose to react angrily. You may choose to react in a very forgiving way. You may choose to react by saying nothing. You may choose to react by reporting her to the manager or him to the manager. You may react, we could just go on and on. There could be 1,000 different ways, or more than 1,000 different ways, that I could choose to react to to an action, something that happened to me. And so this is kind of our life. It's a series of occurrences and reactions. Once we react to someone else's action, then other people that are around us are forced again to make a decision on what they're going to do, what's going to be their action or reaction to what they've witnessed here. So if I jump up and I curse at the waiter for dropping my Pepsi on me and ruining my slacks and blah, 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 somebody, well, a lot of people might just sit there and watch. A lot of people might sit there and think, I wish somebody would say something to that American guy over there. A lot of people might literally just do nothing at all and look away. Some people might, someone might come over and tell me, hey, take it easy, man, take it easy, just an accident. People walking by make a decision on how to react, even in their own mind, like what they think of me. Some people might think, yeah, I would have done the same thing. Some people might think, well, hey, he has every right to do that. Some people might freely choose to think, geez, what a jerk, a person's just doing their job. Okay, well, that's what I've done, and I've kind of started these concentric circles of action and reaction. Action gets a reaction, but action on someone else's part or something else's part may get from me the choice, the free choice, to not react at all, to not do anything in reaction to what this person did or said, or this thing that occurred, maybe even through nature. I don't know, I'm sitting there in the cafe and the wind blows my drink over. Yeah, so nearly no one's fault. You know, again, I have every free ability to decide, hey, how am I going to react to this natural occurrence that happened? Yeah, it's up to me. It's up to all of us. In fact, and all humans have this kind of really absolute freedom, this what he would refer to as boundless freedom, um, of how we choose what we do, how we react to what other people do. We can't control what other people do. We can't control what nature is going to do. But we only have control over our own actions. And it appears then to Sartre, as he watches people in the cafe and I'm sure in other situations, he was a professor, so maybe he's watching students and other colleagues of his. He concludes that although people act out of freedom and they have their complete freedom to do what they choose to do, they also seem to do so rather randomly. That they don't really do this based on any any kind of set guidelines or anything. They just react how they react. Especially it's more fun or more interesting how about the negative things. But there could be positive things you react to or choose not to react to in some way as well. But it seems to be very random, that there's no order to, well, there's certainly no order to the things that happen to us. None of us here, or you're hearing me, none of us had any control over this virus that's come across the United States and around the world. We have no control over that. But we may all, we may fall victim to it. We may get infected. God help us, someone we know might die because of this virus. I hope not. But we have no control over the fact that the virus is here. It's a very interesting thing, and it's in the article I gave you when we first came back from spring break. This idea of, it's kind of hard to hate a virus. If you had an enemy, a person, a country, you're in war, it would be something to have some hatred towards that person or that country or this terrorist group or whatever. But it's a virus, What are you going to do? It's like that gust of wind that blew the Pepsi in my lap. It's just there, and we have to fight it in whatever way we can. But it's not like a war. Not like a physical war, although I'd say it is something like a war. So we don't have control over these things. We have no control over the fact this virus is here. All we can do is choose how we're going to react to the fact, let's say, that this virus is here. How we're going to react to the fact that this person had an accident and tripped and spilled a Pepsi in my lap. How I'm going to react to the fact that my boyfriend and my girlfriend broke up with me, right? How I'm going to react to the fact that some idiot is texting and he decides it's okay to text as he cruises to the intersection and hits me. He made that decision. Now my car's collided. My pants are soaked in Pepsi. The coronavirus is everywhere. Now what am I going to do? I have freedom. I can choose what to do. But Sartre sees that we're all kind of operating really on all these different levels, and we have all these different kinds of reactions, and there doesn't seem to be any, real guidance or guidelines on, what's acceptable or what's not. And that really, to him, becomes his most important thing. Like, what is the backbone behind all of this? Like, this seems to be the story of our life, is a series of actions and reactions, and then other people's reactions to our reactions, and then how we might respond back to that, or how it might upset somebody, that I got mad at the waiter, and then that person decides to, get mad at me, and then I decide to get mad at them, and then someone else decides to come over and break us up from the fight, and then someone comes over and throws me into the Seine River, and then I decide to swim downriver a little bit. See, there's just a series, and I could go on and making up as I go along. But all these decisions that I'm making out of complete freedom, and all the decisions anyone around me is making, they're making those things out of complete freedom. And if we begin to think about the amount of decisions, and with every decision comes freedom. With every decision comes freedom. So every decision I make is made out of complete and total freedom. So if I decide to not react in any way to this Pepsi being spilled on me, then that's my decision. Even though it's a decision to do nothing, it's still my decision, and I made it freely to not react in any kind of negative way. But with every decision comes freedom. And as you begin to think about every decision that you're making, and a lot of those decisions are a decision not to do anything. So if I'm standing in front of a regular class and I look out across the class and I see so-and-so's sleeping, so-and-so's yawning, so-and-so's texting on their phone, and someone else over here is paying attention, taking notes, and okay, this person over here maybe is taking notes also. This person over here is obviously playing a game on their computer because they're smiling way too much to be listening to me. And yeah, I'm just kind of, I'm faced with a decision with each one of those realizations. Each one of those, I can choose to get on to each one of those kids who's not paying attention. I can choose to praise or say nothing to the kids who are taking notes. I can choose to take away the computer from the kid who's playing games on the computer, take away the phone from the person who's texting during class. And then how far I want to push the praise or the punishment from there, I guess, is, somewhat maybe limited, but I'm I'm free to react however I want to. So if we have these intruder on campus drills, and they're we have a certain way we respond to things, and of course there's just so much you can do in a drill. But if it really happened, if something really, really happened, then what would really be our reaction? We know it's not a drill. We can hear gunshots down the hall. What's going to be your reaction then? Are you going to listen to what I say? Listen to whatever any other teacher says? Does it depend on who the teacher is? Again, you probably would make more decisions than you can even fathom in a matter of minutes. And each decision you're making comes with it freedom. And if we begin to think about a situation like that, kind of a high pressure situation where your senses are going to kind of be on overload, and you're really not overload, but really, really heightened, and you're going to have many decisions, life and death decisions maybe you're going to be making for yourself, maybe only you, maybe for other people too. You make all that with freedom and all those decisions. And if you begin to think about a situation like that, or just a regular, even boring day where you're sitting at home and there's nothing to do, and you're not allowed to go out, and you're not supposed to go to the movie, or you can't go to the movies, you can't go to the restaurant, you can't do really much at all, you're just kind of stuck. And even on a boring day like that where you're confined to home in some way, you still make a whole lot of decisions. And we do them almost mindlessly. But if you begin to think about all those decisions on an exciting situation, on a scary situation, or in a boring situation, if you begin to think about it, it is mind-boggling how many decisions you make and how much freedom you have with each one of those decisions. And Sartre refers to this as dizzying freedom. When you really begin to ponder the depth of your freedom, and the depth of, this is important too, the depth of your exercise of that freedom, it becomes dizzying. It is absolutely dizzying to think about how much you are given in the form of freedom, and how much you're faced with in the form of decisions, right? It may not always be, should I jump out the window or go out in the hallway and try to tackle the shooter? It may be, should I watch this YouTube video or should I see what's on next? Should I do Hulu or Netflix today? It may be decisions like that, very mundane, that don't really have any effect on anybody else necessarily. But they may, but probably not. But okay, so if you were ever asked, I guess it won't happen directly in this class this year, but if you were ever asked to define what existentialism is in the shortest way that you possibly can, we would say that your existence precedes your essence. So, just because I want to make sure you understand it, and I don't know how good the microphone is on this computer. Existence comes before your essence. All right. That's not true about everything in the world. That's true, though, for humans. Our existence precedes our essence. We come into the world born as a newborn, seconds old, with nothing but our existence. Now, you could argue that we come into the world with more things than that, and that's fine. I mean, we come into the world with instincts. Yeah? We're hungry. We're cold. Our diaper's wet. You know, it doesn't take very long for babies to react. Babies come out of the womb crying practically. You know, it's uncomfortable. You know, my body's all crunched up. You know, from okay, well, all those things are hopefully going to get we want a baby to cry when it's first born. We want to hear it use its lungs, and that's good. But so you can make an argument that we come into the world more than with our existence. We're just kind of a blob. I think you can make a good argument for that. But let's stick with Sartre, though. We come into the world with our existence, but we do obtain an essence. But where do we get that essence from? Like, where does it come from? And Sartre says and argues that for most all of us, our essence comes from other people. Our essence comes from, it's imposed upon us by others. Probably first and foremost, it's imposed upon us by our parents, right? It's imposed upon us by our friends and acquaintances. It's imposed upon us by our teachers and by our relatives and people close to us. And then maybe as you get a little bit older, there may be other people that you come across, or that you meet or see on TV, or that you see on YouTube or something, and you might become inspired by that person, what they do, what they think, and you may, aspire from that inspiration to be something like they are. You may aspire to be the next Michael Jordan. You may aspire to be the next Reggie Jackson. You may aspire to be the next Tony Dorsett, and you may aspire to be the next Tony Robbins. Who knows? You be inspired, but those things are all these outside influences that are influencing who you become and who you are as a human being. And all those things that I mentioned, these people are, and it could be things as well. It doesn't have to just be people, but people, I think, are probably the most influential in creating our essence. Our parents really first and foremost, as I said, but other things from the outside, they creep in, they're put in front of us, people, and we then are either we latch on to that or that person, and we decide to be like they are, to think like they do, to grasp whatever ideas or faith that they have. And again, of course, all that's done freely. We all take on an essence of our own in a free way, but it's not from within the person. It's from the outside of the person that we're, giving this freedom to them, or that we're, that we're exercising this freedom. So existence precedes essence. Essence is coming really quickly, but existence comes first, though. Now, there was a trend, and I don't know if it's still going on or not. There was a trend when my daughter was before my daughter, well, the time around the time my daughter was born. So she was born in 1994, and the trend was to take headphones, not like earbuds. You have to do it with regular old-fashioned headphones. Um, put headphones on the mom's stomach and play classical music. All right, so in utero, you're getting a dose of Beethoven or Mozart or Bach or Haydn or who knows, Wagner or whatever. And there were whole um, movements about this, like that there was really something that was going to make your baby calmer, and it actually starts to develop his mind in a certain way, and music, this kind of the classical music, begins to really kind of mold their mind in a certain way that they'll be more open to intellectual things and more open to the arts and to music and anyway, yeah. Listen, I think almost every mother did this in the 90s, and maybe I don't know how long it continued on for, maybe until the early 2000s. So that's when a lot of you were born. Um, I don't know that there's any more sensitive or intellectual people now than there were before. Doesn't seem like it to me. Uh, but parents sure tried to do this, though. Well, this was an attempt, even before the baby is physically born, to impose some kind of essence on this child, to give this child something um, that it's not choosing for itself, but that someone's choosing to impose upon them. Yeah, I don't think it really worked, but it was another example of something going on like that. All right, so that's how we are as humans. But why, since our life then is based on morals and social mores and ethics that are imposed upon us by other people. Because that's the case, Sartre says that we're not living our authentic self. We're not living as our authentic self. That we have as humans who have the ability to reason and to think and to use language and to read and to really engage our mind and thought, that we have the really the responsibility in this chaotic world of war for for the people in Europe at the time in this time of virus and this time of turmoil in different ways. We have the responsibility to not live by someone else's morals or ideas or things that are written in stone somewhere, but in fact we have the obligation to create our authentic self, the self that comes from within, by our own thinking, by our own intellect, by our own mind. We should create our authentic self and let our authentic self drive those decisions and those that freedom and guide that freedom that we have to move in a certain direction when certain things happen. As it is now, in a way, this is not his words exactly, but I'm not going too far off track though, but we're living someone else's life because they've imposed their essence and their ideas on us. So we're living their life, not our own life. But if we choose through this kind of some whatever method you might use of self-reflection or the self-reflective activity, that you create your own self. And in fact, Sartre sees it as a responsibility that we have to ourselves and to others to become our authentic self and to become who we are as people and not who others have tried to impose upon us, as they've tried to impose part of themselves upon us and have probably been successful. Um, he's not a religious person in any way. I would say he's an atheist, although I may be more agnostic, but he says very clearly that there are no stone tablets to turn to in order to get the morals that we need to live by. And this is certainly a reference to the Ten Commandments. But only we, through our own freedom and through our own choice, then decide to engage in an act of self-reflection and to create our authentic self. He gives some good examples of existential situations. And it's probably one of the more interesting things. I hope you listen this long so you'll know. But he talks about how, let me see, there's a few of them here, that that people are not afraid of heights. Maybe people listening there are afraid of heights, okay? They're afraid of being in high places. Sartre says no one's really afraid of heights. What people are really afraid of is their freedom to jump off of that height. The height itself is really nothing. I'm not afraid of heights necessarily, but I am afraid of people exercising their freedom to push me off the edge of a building, let's say. That's their freedom in action and making a decision and following through with it, and then I don't have much of a say about it. All I can do is choose how I'm going to react for the last few seconds of my life as I fall off the building. But I'm not afraid of heights. Sartre says I'm afraid of jumping. I'm afraid of my freedom to jump. Sounds extreme, but maybe, some people do. Believe it or not, I went on top of the World Trade Center back in the 1980s, and you stand there at the top, and these windows, you'd look out, and you can actually go outside as well, but you couldn't really see over the edge that much there. But as you look down at the street below and the square down below there, inevitably someone says, man, if I jumped from here, it'd really make a real mess down there or something. It's not so funny anymore, but because people really did that during 9/11. But it's a thought that might go through someone's head. Not a suicidal thought, of course, just a pondering thought. Sartre does use a biblical example as well of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. He says that once God set things up for Adam and Eve in the garden, he tells Adam and Eve they can eat from any tree that they want to, any tree, except for they can't eat from this one tree. Yeah. Now, the verbiage may be not can't eat from it, maybe should not eat from it. It doesn't really matter. The point is that Adam and Eve, even as the first humans on Earth, we might think they weren't that well developed intellectually, but even in whatever infantile state they might have been intellectually, at that point they understood that it was possible for them to eat from that tree. If God says don't eat from it, then it means that it's possible that they could eat from that tree. And if they could eat from the tree, then that means that they might eat from that tree. They might exercise their freedom to eat from the tree. And if they might, then maybe they will, right? So it could happen. If it was impossible for them to get to the tree, if God put some kind of a invisible shield around the tree, a force field of some sort around the tree, and it was impossible for them to get to it, God would just have said, hey, and for your own protection, don't approach that tree over there. It's an electrified force field, and it'll give you quite a shock. Anyway, you can't eat from that tree anyway. But yeah. He didn't say that, though. He left the tree open. So Sartre at least has a sense of Christianity as being a religion that involves and very heavily involves the belief in free will. And that's really our first example from the scriptures of someone exercising that free will. So God says, don't eat from the tree. Right away, they know it's possible that they might, and eventually that they do. So obviously they were able to. And they freely made the decision to do the one thing that God said not to do. And okay, so they could. It was possible they might, and they might do it. They could do it. Maybe they will. All those things are expressions of freedom. Even the commandment or the request from God not to do it is an example of acknowledging these two humans' freedom. He has one other example. I'm thinking about and this is a more kind of no, not obscure, but um, kind of extreme, a bit absurd, in fact, to use another term from Sartre. Yeah, he talks about our freedom, that our life is just absurd. Our life absurdity is a big part of the term absurdity, and the thought of absurdity is a big part of existential writing and philosophy. But this is a bit of an absurd example, though. He says there's a woman who dreads her freedom. In particular, she dreads her freedom of what happens after her husband goes to work every day. Her husband leaves for work in the morning, and they live on a busy street, and a lot of people on the sidewalk and stuff. They live in a city, busy city, and she dreads her freedom. She dreads her freedom to, once her husband leaves, to sit in the window as a prostitute and to prostitute herself. Now you see the absurdity of kind of the example, but it does show that this woman does have the freedom to prostitute herself, sit in the window, and lure people in, I guess, and sleep with them for money, and she has that freedom. You could even argue she has the freedom to do it when her husband is at home, or when he's asleep, maybe. But even when he's there and he's awake, she could at least try it or start it. But I guess she really realizes maybe a deeper freedom, just kind of on different levels, to prostitute herself as once her husband leaves for work. Yeah, so this is the next part I'll get to, and this is that our freedom then becomes our dread. That if you think about how mind-boggling how all this freedom is, and how many decisions we're confronted with every day to make, and how much freedom that we exercise every day, and then how important it is at some point for us to finally step back and reflect upon ourselves and really create our own self, not the self others want us to be, but the self that we choose to be. At that point, our freedom becomes our dread, and we have to do this. It's our responsibility to do it. And Sartre goes further to say that in kind of a paradoxical statement, he says, I'm condemned to be free. I'm condemned to freedom. That all this freedom comes with the responsibility as well. And we talk a lot about that kind of in a patriotic way. We have a lot of freedom in this country, but with that freedom comes a lot of responsibility. Well, that's true. And with this personal freedom comes a lot of responsibility as well. So going back to the example, or the statement about existence precedes essence, that's true for humans. Outside forces begin to impose themselves on us, and then we can choose then, with our existence still intact, we're able then to create our own self from within and not from outside of us, not have it be imposed upon us from the outside. Okay, let me give you an example quickly of how that's like maybe not true of a non-human object. And I'll use Sartre's example of a paper cutter. So I think we have one of these in the teacher's lounge at school. These big boards. I don't know. Sometimes they're probably 2 feet across, and they have that huge blade on it that has a handle in the end, and you can kind of feed paper into it, and you can cut a straight line. If you had to do it with scissors, it would take forever, and you'd probably get kind of wiggly with your cutting. But this is a straight, long blade on an arm. It's got a spring on it, and okay. So let's use the example of a paper cutter. That's one he uses. So at some point, I don't know who invented the paper cutter, but it's been around for a while. But at some point, somebody went to an engineer or to someone who could produce something like this, and said, "Hey, let's say I'm a school teacher, and elementary school teacher, and I cut a lot of big pieces of cardboard and poster board, and I'd love to be able to cut in a straight line, like a long straight line, and maybe even cut consistently, pieces of paper out of a larger piece of paper, smaller pieces out of a larger piece of paper, in the certain size and everything." And they begin to talk about it, and then that both of them together, this guy has his needs as a teacher, this guy over here knows what can be done and what can't be done in a kind of a production sense or engineering sense, and they come up with this paper cutter. So then maybe they're sitting at coffee and they write it on a napkin, and he's got measurements drawn on there, 24 and make it a square cutting board surface, 24 by 24. We'll make the blade, of course, 24 inches long, so it can cut from one end of the board to the other. It'll cut real close to the edge, or right along the edge. And we'll put the blade here underneath with a handle on the end and some kind of protection for somebody to feed their finger into it, and or at least and put some little markings on top of the cutting board, like every inch or so, where they can actually feed pieces into it and know they're pushing another inch, another inch, another inch of paper, and they can be cut each time it goes that way based off of that measurement. Okay, so they talk about every detail about it, and every engineering part of it and production end of it. And then at some point, this person who had the idea for it goes to the factory and is at the end of the assembly line, where people are being exploited and their labor is being alienated, and they're being forced into living under their conditions. All right. Ripe for revolution. But they're at the factory, and out the end of the assembly line rolls a paper cutter, which looks remarkably like the paper cutter that they drew a picture of on the back of the napkin, and that does all the things that they said that a paper cutter would do. So the paper cutter, different than humans, very important, different than humans, the paper cutter had essence before it had existence. And that's different. That's the opposite of humans. Humans have existence, then essence comes along. This thing had essence when I talked about it, when I drew a picture of it, when I put it on the napkin, when we gave it measurements and we gave it some type of purpose. Before it was even had a physical existence, it had essence. It had a purpose before it had its physical existence. And this is how we're different than from physical things. This is how humans are different than physical things. One more thing and I'll be done. Sorry, I think I said last time one more thing. I need to get back here to get my 6th hour. There's one other thing, and I brought it up, I think, on the quiz I gave the other day, about facticity. And facticity is a term from existentialists as well. Facticity, among a lot of other factors, but a lot of other, there's a lot more to it than this, but the one thing I want to focus on, or have you focus on, is that facticity is something that appears to limit our freedom or inhibit our freedom in some way. So I think the example in the book is that someone's hiking up a mountain and a huge boulder has rolled down the mountain and is blocking the path. And that, I have freedom to hike up this mountain, but now there's this boulder in my way. Now what am I going to do? The boulder represents facticity. It appears to inhibit my freedom. Sartre says it only appears that way, though. You now have the decision, and you already made the decision to hike up the mountain. Now you have a further decision to make, and you've got more freedom to exercise now. So something that's a matter of facticity, like this boulder, appears to be limiting your freedom, but in fact actually just broadens your freedom even more, because now you got more decisions to make. Am I going to dig under it? Am I going to try to push this boulder out of the way? Am I going to try to scale around it somehow? Climb over the top of it? Am I going to try to find a different path to go up the mountain? Am I going to turn around and go home? I've got more decisions to make, and each one of those decisions are made with more freedom. So it's actually a multiplier of freedom. Sartre tells this example of in a class he taught at the university of his a student he had who had been in World War II and had lost both of his hands. And he told Sartre, his professor, that he wanted to be a surgeon before the war. And he heard him talking about all the ideas of freedom and how much freedom we have, and he said, "But I don't have freedom. I don't have the freedom to be a doctor. In fact, there's no way I could be." He wanted to be a surgeon actually, and there's no way I could be a surgeon with no hands. And of course, Sartre's answer would be, and this is an example Sartre uses is of this real person a student that he had. But Sartre would say, no, maybe you can't be a doctor, but now this facticity of having no hands has presented you with more decisions to make. You may have made one decision, now there's something standing in the way of that decision, and now you've got more decisions to make. And with more decisions comes the exercise of more freedom. So it appears it stands in the way of your freedom, but in fact, facticity produces more freedom because it produces more decisions that have to be made. All right, that is Sartre in 46 minutes and 22 seconds. I'm just going to stop there, and that'll be our last lecture of the year for this class. I've enjoyed it. It's been an interesting year. Sorry the last 2 weeks have been the way that they've been, but much like we just talked about today, what are you going to do, right? I mean, you're faced with the decision, and I hope you guys are all making the wise decisions to stay in and to avoid people that are not, in your household family, and that you're taking your vitamins and you're washing your hands and just keeping things as clean as you can. And anyway, I hope that's all happening, and I hope that none of you are experiencing any illness in your families. And yeah, so it looks like, since there's not going to be a senior thesis, that you've got the first hour coming up here for the rest of the year kind of free. What I'm going to do is I'm going to send out the test to you. It'll probably come out to you by about noon today, but I'll be emailing it to you. And like I said, there'll be some questions from Chapter 8, and then there'll be some essay or reflection type questions, more essay, I guess I should say, where I want you to apply some of this stuff to a couple of questions. When I say some of this stuff, I mean some of the stuff from this quarter that we've learned. So you have access to your book, and you have access to the internet, to these videos, whatever other notes you took, to help you write that essay. So it's really kind of an open book, a take-home final exam. All right, guys and girls, I've enjoyed it, and I will. I'm sure I'll see all of you at some point. I'm sure there'll be something going on. We'll be able to. I sure hope so. But I will hopefully talk to all of you soon. Okay, take care.